Welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Mark Owen. Nobel Peace Laureate Abiy Ahmed says he'll bury his government's enemies with their blood. Abiy Ahmed's words come on the first anniversary of the internal conflict with the Tigray rebels, with 2 million people at least displaced by fighting and thousands already killed. No precise number yet, sadly. The US is sending an envoy to urge a peaceful solution. Meanwhile, the UN has published a report citing allegations of war crimes on both sides. Well, let's introduce you to our panel of guests to discuss what's at stake. Here in the studio, Roland Marchal, senior researcher at CNRS, that is the National Centre for Scientific Research here in France. Roland, thank you very much for being with us, sir. Joining us by duplex in Washington, Misa Gidi, who's the international relations specialist, a Tigrayan activist. Thank you for being with us. Joining us by Skype, Hone Mandefro, a PhD candidate at Concordia University and advocacy director, Amhara Association of America. Thank you for being with us too. And by Skype from New York, Henok Gabisa, former president of Oromo Studies Association and co-chair of the International Oromo Lawyers Association. Welcome to you all. First, we start with a report here at France 24 by Nick Rushworth.
The conflict in Ethiopia between the government and rebel forces in the country's northern Tigray region began a year ago. It did so on the orders of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. The Nobel Peace Prize laureate vows to continue the fight.
We will bury this enemy with our blood and bones, and we will make the glory of Ethiopia stand high again.
The government announced a state of emergency for at least 6 months on Tuesday, with forces of the Tigray People's Liberation Front reported to be advancing on the capital. The government, under the state of emergency, can order citizens of military age to accept army duty. The Prime Minister has called on people to take up arms against TPLF rebels.
I'm young. I will take part in the war in whatever way young people can. I'm planning to head to the front line.
Those who can should join the fight. If required, I will not hesitate from joining.
Rebels say they now have control of the strategic towns of Dessie and Kombolcha in the Amhara region, putting them just 400 kilometers from the capital. TPLF spokesman Getachew Reda said,
"If achieving our objectives in Tigray requires that we march to Addis Ababa, we will. But we are not saying we are marching to Addis Ababa."
The US Special Envoy to the Horn of Africa will go to Ethiopia on Thursday for a 2-day visit amid increasing international concern. Thousands of civilians have been killed over the last year and more than 2.5 million people have been displaced. The UN estimates around 5 million people in Ethiopia's northern Tigray region are in urgent need of help.
Nick Rushworth setting the scene. The words, the rhetoric today from the Nobel Peace Laureate Abiy Ahmed may be sort of shocking some people. But many people perhaps were expecting words of that ilk. Let's bring in our guests to get some sense of what's at stake here and some idea as to what might happen next. Ms. Gidi, can I start with you, a Tigrayan activist? When you heard the words of Ethiopia's Prime Minister, what did you think?
I'm not shocked. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. I'm not surprised because these are words that he has been using in order to dehumanize the people of Tigray, no matter where they're located. But it's very shocking to hear from him to continue to repeat this rhetoric towards Tigrayans, and that the international community is letting him do this. But it's very shocking and scary because of the rhetoric that he continues to spew. Every Tigrayan's life in Ethiopia is in danger right now.
Can I bring in Hone Mandefro on the same question of the Amhara Association? And Hone, it gets complicated for people coming to this story afresh. Can you explain where the Amhara fit into this equation?
Thank you for having me. The Amhara is one of the largest groups in Ethiopia, and they've been seeking for more representation, political representation in Ethiopia. And in this conflict in particular, there has been war going on in Amhara region for months now. And as you mentioned in your introductory stories, the major cities like Kombolcha and Dessie are under TPLF occupation. And definitely Amharas are still fighting TPLF to liberate themselves with their blade, which, as it is a war. And definitely we're looking at a situation where the conflict is expanding into Amara region and more humanitarian concerns emerging in the region in addition to Tigray.
Indeed, Meza will correct me if I'm wrong, but 2 billion people I've read in researching today's program displaced in Tigray over the past year. Hone, the figures in Amhara rising equally high, as I understand it. Several 100,000 people displaced there.
Yes, the figures, right now there are 1.7 million displaced people in Amara region, most of them from the conflict that's happening right now in Tigray and Amara and in Afar. But also there are estimated 5 million, at least 5 million people in TPLF held occupied areas that have not been getting humanitarian aid for months in some places. And a lot of infrastructure damage. Just in one zone in North Wallo, about 2,000 schools were damaged, and obviously the properties, both public and private, have been looted by TPLF militia. We've also recently published a report where we documented about 306 cases or incidents of sexual and gender-based violence just in 2 zones, in North and South Gondar zones of our region. And we're hearing reports, and some of this has been reported in the news, that people are starting to die out of starvation in places like Lalibela that has been under TPLF occupation for months. Obviously, the latest report from the USAID that was published end of October confirmed that there are IPC level 5 food insecurity catastrophe, which is a famine condition in North Wallo, some parts of Wagumra, and some parts of South Wallo as well. So there is an ongoing humanitarian crisis in that region, and it's only getting worse as the PLF is making advance to major cities like Desi and Kombucha.
Not taking sides at all here, but when you list those kind of things, it is actually horrendous that this is going on in a country which is already struggling, of course, to meet the needs of so many, in spite of the achievements of Prime Minister Ahmed in terms of trying to turn around the economy, for instance, of Ethiopia, which I understand had been doing well until this conflict kicked off. Let's bring in our third guest from afar, Henok Gabisa from the International Oromo Lawyers Association. Again, sir, can you explain where you're coming from in this discussion, the people you represent, and how they're being affected?
Thank you for having me here again. So 1 year into the conflict, I mean, exactly this is November 30th, 1 year of this conflict. What we're witnessing is that tens of thousands of people have been killed, murdered in the northern part of the country. Not only the killings, but also the future of the Tigray region has been completely destroyed. And we have to also remind each other that this is a clear war of aggression by a group of political leaders who had the vision to expand territories such as the Amara regional government. This is not only true against Tigray, but in the borders between Oromia and Tigray, between Oromia and Amara region, lands have been expanded forcefully by the governmental assistance from the Tigray, from the Amara region. So all of this added together is that Abiy Ahmed said when he started this military operation that this is a rule of law operation that's going to be handled within weeks. So this tells us that after a year, the destruction is more bigger than, substantially higher than what we have imagined in the past. So there is a complete disastrous lack of leadership in the country, which is so incapable. If you go to Oromia, the atrocious killings of citizens and young people without any court order is the daily existence in Oromia. While we observe that there is an advance being made by the Oromo Liberation Army, which is the only liberation force for the Oromo people that has been fighting since 1973. So now that we see a strategic alliance between Tigray Defense Force and the Oromo Liberation Army based on principle and based on the right to self-determination in accordance with the constitution of the country, we are hoping to see some kind of future in a post-Abiy Ahmed situation.
With what you've described, all three of you, extremely clearly and extremely eloquently, I'm left thinking it's amazing that Ethiopia has held together thus far. And we'll get back to you and allow you to contribute even more during this programme. Thank you so much. For now, bear with us. Let's bring in Roland Marshall from the CNRS here in France, the Centre for National Scientific Research here in France. Roland, the origins of this crisis. Clearly, we can talk about the problems that Ethiopia had with Eritrea. That was eventually resolved. Abiy Ahmed got the Nobel Peace Prize over that, resolving that issue. But now there's a Pandora's box that is really opened, isn't there?
Yes, well, it's always difficult to sum up the origin of such a complex conflict. But let us say you have two aspects certainly to take into account. One is the legacy of the previous regime led by TPLF, which was very authoritarian, a police state, that certainly frame a certain kind of federal structure for the country. Now, basically, I believe many Ethiopians still believe that this federal structure is what they need, but they need fine-tuning. They need to adapt. Some even would like to enforce their right for secession, including people among Oromos, maybe people among Tigrayans today. And of course, this raises many difficulties for the very existence of a state. So when Abiy Ahmed was elected, he was supposed basically to cool down a very extremely tense situation because IDPs, displaced people, people suffering from a very poor livelihood were already hundreds of thousands, if not more, actually more than millions. But basically, to stay in power, he has to confront TPLF, Tigray regional state, and the things went from bad to worst, mainly because to build alliances, he had to appear increasingly as someone who wanted to rebuild a unitary state against a federal structure that, you know, with a lot of problems, with a lot of difficulties, was certainly providing rights and cultural rights, cultural, political recognition to a large part of the population. So today, a year ago exactly, Abiy Ahmed was claiming that in a couple of weeks we will be in Mekele, the capital of Tigray. We will take over Tigray. Everything will be solved. Today, TPLF or the Tigray Defense Forces are claiming that soon they may take over Addis Ababa. So we see that things have not gone on the right way. But the key issue is how we save the population first. Second, what kind of political agreement could emerge from such a military mess? And third, okay, with Ethiopia as it was, or with a new Ethiopia with new states, how is this region able to live peacefully and to basically build the development it deserves? And he has the ability to provide to his own population. These are the questions that you could raise to our Ethiopian friends here, as well as to the Ethiopian political elite.
Indeed, well, unfortunately, the Ethiopian political elite not present in this debate, sadly, and I would like to put that question to them, clearly, as to why this is happening. Well, let's bring in Meza Gidi, the Tigrayan activist, joining us from Washington, D.C. Meza, you've been listening to what Roland Marshall was just saying. I was going to ask you, what actually do you want as a Tigrayan activist? But can you give us some kind of take on what Roland was just saying as well?
Yeah, first of all, I would advise everybody from refraining making the kind of allegations that your guest just made, saying that TPLF was authoritarian, that Tigrayans in a way were privileged or they had upper hand in the country's matters. That wasn't the fact. That wasn't the fact, and it is this kind of rhetoric that actually fueled the hate towards Tigrayans, resulting in the atrocious crimes that are being committed against Tigrayans today.
Meza, can you then, sorry to interrupt you, can you put it right then? Can you sort of really express what you think the situation was, how it should have been expressed?
So the situation prior to November 3rd was that there was an ethnic or multinational federalism in Ethiopia. At least there was a constitutional arrangement that gives people the right, and nations and nationalists the right self-administration. But with the coming of Abiy Ahmed to power, he completely shredded that constitutional arrangement and started pitting ethnic groups against each other by using media propaganda and here towards a group of people that he deemed as an enemy of the country. Instead of doing a diligent and due investigation into crimes or massacres that might have happened across the country, he was rushing towards blaming one independent political party, and by way of that, he was implicating the people of Tigray and all of that. So it is this kind of reckless comments and rhetoric that are actually resulting in the massacre in the days of our people. So it would be really, really a human thing to do to differentiate what actually has happened and what the government of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed himself, is using as a political propaganda. Having said that, as a Tigrayan, what I want and what I believe most of the Tigrayans want is our right to self-determination to be respected. We want to be administered by people that are from our region, that speak and understand our culture and language. And it's because this right was taken away from us that the Tigrayan Defense Forces are fighting day and night to fend off the genocidal regimes and invaders from our land. At the same time, I heard your other guests talking about expansion of the conflict to other regions of the country. The main reason, and I hope the international community understands, behind the expansion is the blockade. There is a blockade that was imposed on the people of Tigray ever since the war started. Tigray haven't had access to humanitarian aid at all, and people are dying in hundreds, if not thousands, of starvation on a daily basis. There are no medicines, there is no internet, no phone in Tigray. So if people are really concerned about the future of Ethiopia, I believe they should hold the Ethiopian government accountable, as well as the Amhara expansionists and the Eritrean forces that continue to be in Tigray causing havoc and destruction, and also are continuing to rape Tigrayan women in western and eastern part of Tigray. And the other thing the international community should do in order to serve justice towards the victims of this ongoing state-sponsored genocide is do not tell the Tigrayans to die silently. We are not going to die silently. I believe the international community has had ample opportunity and time to intervene and broke peace and negotiation between all political fractions within the country so that there could be a political settlement. However, they didn't do that. They continue to make cover-ups and excuses, including the joint investigation that one of your guests was referencing to, talking about how many women are raped. So the international community really needs to understand that who is the root cause of this problem. Throughout history, Ethiopia has had several conflicts, and then the main reason or the core of all this conflict is the expansionist mentality of the Amhara elites and the cause that they have been pushing forward, which is a unitarist country whereby nations and nationalists wouldn't have the right self-determination and exercise their democratic right.
Ms. Agidi, a Tigrayan activist, thank you very much indeed. You pointed the finger at the Amhara. Let's bring in Hone Mandefro to comment on that one. Hone, the floor's yours.
Thank you. Let me start from the last point of the Amhara elites.
Expansionism. I think expansionism was the accusation.
Yes, and that expansionism is attributed to Amhara elites. And I've heard this being said again and again, but that doesn't make it true. In fact, I've never seen an Amhara elite claiming the land from other regions. In fact, what has happened is, as your guest alluded in his remark, TPLF imposed a divisive ethnic federalism system in 1990. They ruled the country with complete immunity, with gross atrocities against many ethnic groups, including Amhara and Oromos, and they annexed lands from many regions, Afar, Amhara primarily. And there has been a movement among Amharas in Walgait, in Raya, for recognition for self-determination, and the response from the TPLF ruled the TPLF regime in the 3 decades from 1990 was mass arrest and ethnic cleansing from these areas. That is actually why the TPLF lost power in 2018, because Amharas at that point, and Oromos, I must say, said like, this is enough. You've been privileged. You've been ruling this country with complete immunity, and that's enough. And that led to Abiy Ahmed coming to power. So there's no notion of like Amhara expansionism is just a common I would say speech that is evoked to justify a political agenda. What has happened since 2018 and what Abiy has done in terms of this challenges is Abiy did had an opportunity to forge consensus on a much more comprehensive reform. He didn't do that. Because of that, there were mistakes in the transition process that started in 2018, such as letting the Oromo Liberation Army, clearly a genocidal group, committing ethnic cleansing against Amaras, according to Genocide Watch November statement. They were allowed to come into the country armed, and they started insurgency, and that led to the expansion of the conflict that we're seeing now. But also, there was also an element of TPLF basically refusing to accept the fact that they cannot rule this country with complete impunity. So they started the counter revolution immediately. They regrouped themselves in Mekelle, started to create havoc across the country, started to undermine the federal government's interest and attempted, although limited, to forge democratic alliance. So that ultimately expressed itself in a war that TPLF started by attacking the Ethiopian National Defense Force on November 3rd, a year ago in Mekelle. So in terms of the comment about unitary state, I believe there is no viable political group right now in Ethiopia that's advocating for unitary form of governments. There are differences in terms of level of decentralization. There are differences in terms of what kind of federalism we want. Some say regional, some say ethnic federalism, but it's not accurate that many Ethiopians want ethnic federalism, as one of your guests alluded. In fact, a recent study by the Barometer survey indicated that the statistics shows that Ethiopians are divided when it comes to the support or opposition to ethnic federalism. So we believe as Amaras, the ethnic federalism, or at least for Amara Association of America, the ethnic federalism system is a system that promotes hate and division. It incentivizes elites to work against their own, against the national government or at the expense of other ethnic groups. There is enough independent research showing that inter-ethnic conflict has skyrocketed since the ethnic federalism system was imposed on Ethiopian people in 1991, and mainly without the participation of Amaras.
I need to cut you off there because I think we're getting a bit confused at this end as to where this is going. I mean, basically, from my perspective, I'm listening to you all reasoning through what you feel, and I'm trying to add up how this adds up to 2 million people being displaced in Tigray and thousands of people being killed, which is the tragedy of what is going on today. Only, can I pause you, bring in Henok for a comment before I come back to Roland? Henok, over to you.
I just was listening to some of the most fabricated statements from the panelists, the latest panelists. Obviously, in this current conflict and the overall political conflict in the country, it's an established fact that the Amara government is a clear aggressor in most of the situations. The panelists earlier spoke about the Oromo Liberation Front being not allowed to come back to the country. This is a typical Amara expansionist mentality or psychology. In a way that the country called Ethiopia belongs to a few and being led by a few Amara elites, and the Oromos do not have any place in it. The Tigray people do not have any place in it. This is the problem that we are dealing with, and that we've been dealing with, and that we will be dealing with it until such time that Abiy would be removed from power and the country goes back to the federal constitutional multicultural arrangement. So having said that, this country from 1889, the time when it was built forcefully, brutally on the blood of the Oromo people and most of the southern nations and nationalities, particularly led by the genocidal Menelik army, up until the time of Derg in 1991, the nation state or the state building project has been tried for over 140 years, which were led by the Amara elites. They had more than a fair chance of doing something with the country, but we ended up in 1991, up until 1991, a national civil war among different kind of people that has been led by Mengistu Haile Mariam. Now, after 1991, there was a glimmer of hope. in the country to create a new kind of social contract or some kind of national aspiration among nations and nationalities to find a way to coexist peacefully and then manage their differences. That's exactly what.
Are you saying Prime Minister Ahmed has broken that idea completely?
It's obvious that when he dismantled the existing political party EPRDF, we all know that EPRDF had its own significant political problem for the last 27 years, but the way EPRDF was dismantled did not follow the legitimate and legal process. And then what he did was he created a singular political party based on the idea of one nation, one language, and probably one religion. That goes back to the original scene created by Emperor Menelik in 1889. And the conflict against Tigray and the silent war against the Oromia in the last 3 years is a byproduct of that political vision of Abiy Ahmed to unionize forcefully and militarily create a strong one Ethiopia based on the Amara elites mentality or psychology. So this is the problem that we are currently facing with. How can we get out of this? Our co-panelists mentioned that the 1991 constitution or political arrangement or settlement brought about ethnic division. The reality on the ground is that Ethiopia is a diversified type of nation. There are people with different language, different identity, and different aspiration, and different historical background. This is a reality that we have to live with. But the problem is when you do not have the right political and legal prescription to manage these multicultural differences, if you do not stick to the constitutional process to manage or resolve conflicts, what you get is the type of political practice that Abiy is doing now. Now, there is obviously a territorial boundary problem or conflict in Tigray, in Amara, in Oromia. There is a constitutional process to settle these kind of differences. But the problem is that prime ministers such as Abiy Ahmed and most Amara government elites are the ones who believe in taking up arms to enforce their undeserved right to expanding on their land. So the Tigray people are using their God-given right to defend themselves, and they just wanted to remedy this 1 year of genocidal campaign.
Let me pause you there. Let me pause you there because I think your argument is actually backed by Joe Biden, who's calling on the Ethiopian state to rein back its troops, and obviously by that he means Prime Minister Ahmed's forces, which is what he's actually done, threatening to sort of suspend Ethiopia's access to the free market deal with the US, which is clearly highly lucrative. Let me just pause our three guests for the moment, come back to Roland Marshall here in the studio for another perspective on this. I mean, clearly we're hearing from our guests. There are different people, different languages, and different aspirations and hopes. All the violence going on, which clearly is something we want to stop. It's difficult to hear from what these three are saying that that's possible. But is the idea of one Ethiopia, is that really something that isn't viable, something that really, perhaps they need to move on from?
The point is, I guess a majority of people is very much attached to the idea of one Ethiopia. Now, the shape of the state, the functions of the state, the structure of the state should be debated. Because as he was said, maybe by all, this federal arrangement created its own problem about delimiting borders, as using political power to actually redraw borders, not taking care of the wishes of local community, arbitrating the wishes of local community with the necessity of managing or administrating land and so on. So you have plenty of problems. The question is not for any expert to decide what is right or wrong. The problem that has been raised first under TPLF, because TPLF ended as a very violent regime against his own population. And that's why basically Abiy Ahmed came to power as a solution to cool down the situation. Is all those political elites at one point, they don't like to sit, to talk, and to listen what other people want to say. that is contradictory to their own opinions. And therefore they use the army, they use the militias, they use the special police forces to enforce their own views against the wish of people. Is what the TPLF did recurrently throughout his reign, and is what Abiy Ahmed promised not to do and eventually did. The result is what we have today, which means a country that is collapsing, one of the best hope for the African continent collapsing, a capital city that may actually be collapsed and get into major internal troubles, and then maybe be taken over by insurgents. And the insurgents, are they able to rule Ethiopia today as they were ruling Ethiopia 3 years ago? I doubt very much. So you need people to start labeling others. You see people to look for solution. And the first moment is, of course, to stop fighting. And so there are conditions to be met to stop fighting. A ceasefire is not something that you decrete just by goodwill. It has to be helped. The international community proposed several times to mediate and help all kinds of discussion that could bring about a ceasefire in the country. That was opposed by Abiy Ahmed or by Tigrayan leadership. And this brings this country into now nearly a collapse. So those people, my Ethiopian friends here, they have to reflect on that. What will be next? Because it's true to claim whatever other people say, it's propaganda, but then this is one country, and this country may disappear tomorrow. So is it Yugoslavia you want in Ethiopia, or is it something much better? That's your decision.
I will give Mesa, Hone, and Henok a chance to comment on that in a moment. A US envoy is on his way to Addis Ababa to try to urge a peaceful solution. Roland, I don't know what that envoy is hoping to achieve in the context of what we have. And let me just bring in now from the United Nations the words of Michelle Bachelet, who of course is the High Commissioner for Human Rights. She, in the report that's been issued today, talks about ethnic killings identified in Ethiopia, citing in particular 200 civilians killed in November following and revenge attacks that follow that. Michelle Bachelet says there have been abuses committed by both sides in the conflict right now that could result in war crimes charges.
All parties to the Tigray conflict have committed violations of international human rights, humanitarian and refugee law. Some of these may amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Recent days have seen reports of continued shelling by the Ethiopian National Defense Forces of the Tigrayan regional capital of Mekelle, and further advances by Tigrayan forces into the neighboring region of Amhara. We are receiving continued allegations of serious abuses and violations of international human rights and international humanitarian law. There are reports of shelling and airstrikes resulting in civilian death, summary executions, large-scale displacement, and a worsening humanitarian situation.
Michelle Bachelet, the UN High Commissioner of Human Rights. Let's bring in to react to that our Tigrayan activist, Mesa Gidi, who's joining us from Washington, D.C. Mesa, when you hear the words of Michelle Bachelet there, talking about these atrocities committed by both sides, what is your reaction to that? I mean, surely anybody who has and is judged to have done wrong should face justice too.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the crimes being committed on both sides, but what I know to be a fact is that there is a need for an independent investigation that would look into all the war crimes and crimes against humanity that have been committed across Tigray and maybe elsewhere. But it's very important that this investigation is done and conducted completely by an international neutral authority, and that it doesn't include any Ethiopian designated organization, including the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission.
Is the UN enough, Mesa, for you? Is the UN independent enough? Sorry to interrupt you. Is the UN independent enough?
The UN, European Union, and any other. The UN so far, by its actions, has proven to be anything but a supporter of the Ethiopian government because they have failed to take effective measures. But I believe that is primarily because the UN is a composition of countries that have diverging and at times conflicting interests over Ethiopia. So what I think is there needs to be a consensus amongst the international community that Abiy Ahmed and his administration is a genocidal one, and that has taken Ethiopia towards the path of disintegration by widening ethnic tensions that were already there. Instead of delivering on the promises and hopes that the EPRDF and Abiy Ahmed had already made prior to him coming to power, he broadened the tensions and waged a genocidal war against the people of Tigray as well as those in Oromia and in other parts of the country. So the sooner the international community comes to consensus with this fact, I believe that the international community, by consulting with relevant stakeholders from Ethiopia, would be able to establish an entity, an organization of some sort that would independently look into all war crimes.
Mesa, I need to stop you and give Hone a chance to answer that one from the Amhara side of things. You said genocidal. It is an inflammatory word. But, you know, the fact of the matter is some 2 million people have been displaced, and we can't put a figure on the number of people killed. This is something that varies, but clearly the fact that people are losing their lives, and of course there's a risk of famine too. There are a number of reasons why you point towards genocide.
Yeah.
Go on, go ahead.
Yes, if I may, genocide
Quickly,
is not
please.
really, it could be inflammatory to some, but to Tigrayans it's not, because genocide is nothing but the intentional extermination of a group of people in or in general. And what has been happening against the people of Tigray is just that. And the Ethiopian government did so little to
Mesa,
hide
you've made your point. Let me give Hone a chance to answer because we're running out of time.
told-
Mesa, I need to stop you. I'm very sorry, but thank you. Your point is loud and clear. Thank you. Hone, from the Amhara Association, please give us your perspective.
The report clearly have shown that all the parties have committed serious.
So you'd accept a UN investigation, would you?
We have some reservations in terms of numbers, in terms of the coverage, but that's primarily a methodological issue. We believe the UN and is an independent institution, and we do not expect, obviously, a complete factual accounting of everything that happened. But generally, the conclusion.
Do you accept the 2 million displaced from Tigray, Hone? I wonder if you accept that as a figure.
We do know that people have been displaced from Tigray from one part of Tigray to another, from Tigray to Amhara region, and those were including Amharas. So the conclusion of the report is all parties have displaced people from different directions, and I think that's a strong base for us to go into moving forward, recognizing that all people, different groups have suffered, all warring parties have committed atrocities, and there should be accountability for that. This idea of my ethnic group is the only victim and it has to be at this level, it should be recognized this one. I think that's not a productive one. We need empathy across ethnic groups. We need solidarity. And that's the only way we avoid catastrophes that has been mentioned. But just to quickly point out about the constitutional process issue, I think it's
quickly, please.
I think it's worth mentioning that part of the war, the reason why this war started was because TPLF refused for a constitutional process, including how to conduct elections by conducting its own election, including how issues of border and identity should be determined by refusing to recognize a constitutionally mandated border and commission council that was the border and identity commission that was set up by the constitutional legitimate organ in the federation.
Hone, should there be a ceasefire straight away? Because you're talking about elections and voting and all of these issues, and I know they're really, really important. But presently, people are getting killed. I mean, surely this has to stop, doesn't it?
It has to stop, and I think the TPLF should be disarmed because we have seen that they are a threat to national security. They have killed people everywhere they go.
But
and they have
is the state to blame too? Because that's what Joe Biden appears to be saying.
I agree that the state also is part of the blame in terms of atrocities committed against civilians, and And it's worth noting that the federal government, in a statement issued today, recognized and said that they will work towards that. So as I said, all parties have committed atrocities against civilians. That we all should
Mandefra, I need to stop you. Thank you so very much indeed. It's loud and clear what you're saying. Your message is really coming through. We're running out of time, though. Let's go to Henok from the Oromo International Lawyers Association for what could be the final comment. Over to you, sir. Henok.
So the report that has been released by the UN, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, does not really scratch the surface of what happened in the country. It's not comprehensive. It does not cover the territorial scope of where major atrocities took place, both in Tigray and Oromia.
So it's even worse.
It does not cover all the territorial scope of the place where the atrocities took place. It does not cover all the places. They have clearly said that in the report. And one of the partners in the report, who is Daniel Bakale, who leads the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, state agent, he is somebody who is loyal to the political party that has a deeply embedded hate against the Tigray and against the Oromia's multicultural political perspective. So
you're saying that the deck's already loaded then in the publishing of this report is actually biased? That's what you're saying?
Obviously, the report, the people who are suffering on the ground are not well represented in the preparation of the report, and it's one-sided. And to the extent that it unearths or it covers the Ethiopian state's atrocity, the report can be useful in that aspect. But we cannot conclude that this report is conclusively an evidence of what's happening. It barely scratched the surface. But I just want to come back to one point about...
If you do it quickly, I'd appreciate it, please.
So the dangerous form of national identity that Abiy is perpetrating is something that's similar to Milosevic of Yugoslavia. So one of your panelists earlier raised about the possibility of Yugoslavia in Ethiopia. That's exactly what Abiy is doing. The form of identity that's based on one nation, one language, and one Amara elite perspective is what's killing the country down. And we hope to stop this, and we call on international community to stand with the perspective and inspiration of multicultural constitutional arrangement that has a possibility of pushing the country forward to sit down and agree on a new
celebrating the differences is probably how you put it. Henok Abisa, I need to stop you there, of the International Oromo Lawyers Association. Thank you, sir. Thank you to Hono Mandefro from the Amhara Association, and thank you to Meaza Gide, the Tigrayan activist, joining us from Washington. Thank you, all three of you, and thanks to Roland Marshall here, senior researcher at the CNRS in France. Thank you, sir, for your insight as well. You can, of course, watch this again, and please give us your thoughts too on the situation in Ethiopia and Tigray as the envoy goes there to try to urge a peaceful solution. Certainly from the Washington perspective, we've heard here about the differences that are deeply entrenched and standing perhaps in the way of that. Stay with us, more to come.